So here we are on this warm August evening, and we're going to talk about Premiere Pro and After Effects and all sorts of fun things.
So welcome, everybody.
Hi. So I'm going to start showing our agenda and all that good stuff. So it says June, because that's wrong. It's August. Then we're talking about Premiere Pro. We're going to cover some of what's new in After Effects. We're going to get to Brian's presentation on Premiere Pro. We'll take a look at the prompts that we have for camping, some show and tell if anybody's up for it, and then talk about some upcoming meetings and news at the end. So, as per usual, the public release lately of After Effects is not super exciting, just bug fixes and things like that. There's a whole list on the help site for Adobe that goes through what's new and goes through all the bug fixes. This is just a summary. It's mostly 3D stuff, like a lot of small quality of life things, nothing too major. However, if you've been watching the After Effects beta, there's a lot going on in the beta. That's a lot of really cool stuff, like really a lot. So multi-frame rendering that was introduced for testing a couple versions ago is continuing to get faster. And what they're finding is that the more powerful computers are getting faster each time they're revising this and building it. So if you have a not very great computer, it's still going to help you, but not as much as if you have a really great computer. It's going to go very, very, very fast. So I'm very much looking forward to that coming out of beta, but you can install the beta alongside the regular version, so I encourage you to play with it. The other thing that they're doing now is what they're calling dynamic composition analysis, which is a mouthful to say on a meeting. And what that's basically doing is it's taking away a lot of the guesswork, where I think in some of the earlier versions of multi-frame rendering, you would say like how many, you had preferences for like how many cores you want to spin up and everything. And what this does is it changes how much of your computer it's using depending on what's going on in your compositions. So if you have, an effect that's not multi-frame rendering capable, it's just going to spin back down to 1. And then the other frames that it can render with all your cores, it's going to keep on going for that. So that's getting smarter too about how it's rendering. The other thing that's kind of cool is that they're now enabling render queue notifications through the Creative Cloud app. So if you have the Creative Cloud app on your phone, which this is the only reason I've actually installed it on my phone, the render queue will actually, if you turn it on, send you a notification when your comps are done rendering, which is super handy. So if I go, grab a cup of coffee while I'm waiting for my renders to be done, it will tell me when I need to come back downstairs and actually do my work. They also, the notifications don't matter for this, but multi-frame rendering is now enabled in Media Encoder beta. So even if you send stuff to Media Encoder, you're going to get that multi-frame goodness. Previews now are multi-frame rendering capable. So it's not just your render queue, it's your actual, timeline previews. And speaking of that, they have a new thing called Speculative Previews. And what this is doing is it's basically automatically generating your previews for you while you wait and you're doing other things. So I'm going to show a video that's from when they first introduced this. A couple things changed a little bit, but this does a good job of kind of explaining how that's going to work.
Hi, and welcome to a short little video about Speculative Preview. You can see here After Effects open, and there are no cache markings. There are no frames that have been rendered. If I try to scrub around the composition, I'm really just getting adaptive preview, or I'm waiting for individual frames to render.
Anyone else getting an echo?
Now with Speculative Preview, found here in the Preview panel, once I enable that, and we wait a few seconds for After Effects to be idle, you'll start to see the green cache markers actually grow. After Effects is now rendering these frames in the background without adjusting your composition or playing back any frames. And so that when you return back to your composition and your timeline, you can now freely scrub back and forth between all of the rendered frames. Now, right now that's done around the current time indicator, but if you would like to do it from the current time indicator forward, you can simply come back to the Speculative Preview options and turn off this second checkbox. Now, after After Effects has been idle for a few seconds, The rendering will begin from the current time indicator moving forward. This is a new feature available in After Effects Public Beta. We'd love you to give us feedback and let us know what you think. Thanks.
So it's a small thing, but it's playing around with this. It's super convenient to just like be working in a comp, get a notification on Slack and like go answer them, and then come back and it's like half my comp is rendered and ready to go. And I didn't need to like wait for the preview to generate at 2 frames a second or whatever it would be before I can watch it real time. It's just one of those small things that's super, super helpful. And I'm really excited for this to eventually make it out of beta. And the next thing that they're enabling is this cute little snail down here that they're calling the composition profiler. And this is really handy if you got like a kind of complicated effect stack or a lot of expressions that are that seem to be bogging down your comp a little bit. You can actually turn this on and it's going to show you per layer and per effect and per expression on a property how long it's taking to calculate. So you can see if your CC vector blur is actually taking 2.5 seconds to render. Maybe you can adjust those settings and dial it down so it's going to go a little bit faster. And
that is amazing. Oh my goodness.
So great. It's so great.
I'm freaking out.
And in a conversation about this, somebody actually asked somebody from Adobe, it's like, well, if I leave this on all the time, is this slowing things down? And they said the performance hit for leaving this on is like 0. It's pretty negligible. So I have been leaving this on almost all the time, unless I need the extra space in my timeline horizontally to get some more real estate in there. But it's super handy, and you can even see at the bottom like how long each frame, like that current frame, is going to take to render. And that's what's nice about this too, is that it's showing you your current frame, so you can scrub around and see, like, if you have a really heavy section, you can just look at that and kind of see what's going on. It's so nerdy and awesome, and I love it. So that is what's new. I'm going to flip it over to Brian. Actually, before I do, are there any other comments about what's new, or anybody else excited about the nerdy things like seeing how long a frame takes to render, how long your expression will take to run?
Can't wait for that snail to go live. It's gonna be great.
It's the snail's name is Oscar.
What?
Officially, it's and I guess the pun is like, it's like Oscar Go. Escargot. The After Effects team loves puns, especially food puns. So there's lots of fun things like that in there.
Heck yeah.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and Brian is going to walk over using Premiere Pro and how that might help you in your workflow. So Brian, I will let you take it away.
Cool. So yeah, I'm probably one of the weirder members here in that I'm in Premiere 90% of the time, and After Effects maybe 10, and the stuff I do in After Effects is very basic. I am one of probably, I think we have roughly 30 of us on staff at Channel 9. I'm one of the news photographers and editors, so I'm in the field pretty much any given day. I'm actually up north on vacation right now, so that's kind of why it's a weird looking background. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to going back to work next week. But I pretty much live on a laptop, and we will shoot stories in the field, edit them in the field, and feed them in directly. So the stuff I do isn't necessarily the prettiest in the world because our deadlines are very crazy. My day typically starts at 2, and by 9 p.m. something is going on the air, and I don't know what it is. So with that, we kind of try to make it as interesting as possible in any given day, but we have a lot of just crazy constraints that we don't always get to control. So I'm going to try and share this here. It worked earlier, so it's bound not to work now. Okay, hopefully it's sharing the screen. So you'll kind of notice at the bottom, I have 2 versions of Premiere up. And I don't know with After Effects how often you will wait to go to the new version. With Premiere, the running joke is wait at least a month before you consider switching over, because there's always problems with Premiere for some reason. The latest, when they moved to 2021, we shoot on Panasonic P2 cameras and the audio didn't work at all. It just completely stopped working. And the Premiere team is like, yeah, we're working on it. And it was a good 3 months before it started working. I just moved over to 2021 here, maybe 2 weeks ago. So that's my first tip, is always keep the old version handy, because you surprisingly will need it. To give you a little background, this fine looking graphic is typically what we get from our producers, and it literally is just a PNG. So I've started using After Effects to avoid just these really, really bad graphics that someone in corporate America decided were great. The first thing I do is, and I will bring up my folders here, is I've built a template. If you end up using Premiere a lot, the biggest speed thing for me, and hopefully this opens correct because I already have a bunch of other stuff open, is I just have a template project that I use that, and we'll see if it opens it correctly. Yeah, it does. So I have a folder that all of my camera, I just call it camera raw, all of my clips go into it. I build out one sequence that holds all of those. I have a sequence that I'll ultimately edit that I just call package, and tease material. They inevitably want us to feed some stuff in so they can use it for promotions and things like that before the newscast hit. So those are kind of my default things that I always have set in. With the package one, I kind of take it a step further, and again, it's just a time-saving thing. If you go into, the one thing I like about Premiere is they have very obvious tabs. So audio, your audio workspace. The one thing we do in news is we tend to pan audio, odd channels to the left, even channels to the right. And that's kind of for our archive purposes. So if I'm working with something later on, it's easy for me to strip out the reporter's track if I just need the video. I took it a step further, and this is typically where a lot of my NAT sound from my camera comes from, and it's already preset to like roughly 18-20 dB down. So I don't have to go back through and do that. And it's just a little time saver for me when I'm getting anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes to put a story together. So that's kind of the setup that I do. Yours may be, in production, it could be radically different. I actually kind of blended this from different presentations I had seen that were more production geared, where they have a folder for all of their still pictures. They have a folder for motion graphics. They have a folder for each camera that they're using. And I think the more organized you are in your project bin, a lot like After Effects, the easier it is for you overall. So that is probably one of the biggest things I do just to speed things up. We're kind of lucky in that Channel 9, our broadcast standard is 720. So it's very lightweight. So I don't get bogged down a lot by video. If I go into After Effects, I just set it as a 720 project, so everything renders fast. So it helps that way. And I seem to have lost the other stuff on my other projects. That's weird. Or did I? Yeah, we'll open them again. So I have a couple different things where I've taken Premiere and typically taken After Effects in. And typically what I do is I use the dynamic link. If you don't use it a lot between the two programs, it is fantastic. When it first came out, it was kind of a little rough, but it seems like every every iteration, it just gets smoother and smoother. The thing I like about it from a news standpoint is, as an example, this is just bringing in some court documents. And I hope that audio isn't coming through. It's driving me nuts. But we'll use this a lot for court documents. And a perfect example of this was my executive producer called me, and I'll zoom this so you can actually see it. The person hadn't been charged yet, so we weren't naming them. However, in the court document, they're named. No one told me that they hadn't been charged yet, so I had the name, which we had to blur out. The nice thing with After Effects is you go in, you put a blur on it, and by the time you get back over to Premiere, it's already fixed from that standpoint. So the dynamic linking is truly your best friend with that. The other thing I've started doing is inside of Premiere, timing out my video. So for example, if I were going to use this clip for whatever reason, you can immediately just right click and send it to replace with After Effects composition. And it'll send your video over the exact amount of time you need, and it eliminates some of the guessing game as far as trying to figure out how much video you need. Apparently I'm getting more emails. So those are, you know, I mean, with Premiere, to me, that's the biggest time saver. A lot of our station actually edits on a program called Edius. And I have crews that will call me and say, hey, can you just build this graphic real quick? And it's great, except without the dynamic linking, when you make a mistake, you have to go and re-render it and re-export it and send it to them again. This is one of the biggest time savers, just to put a little animation into what is otherwise just court documents. And I think, you know, our goal for the viewer is to make it a little more interesting to watch and still try to give them the information that we're trying to give them. Another, you know, and I mean, it's a super simple thing for people that work in After Effects day in and day out. But we were doing a story a couple weeks ago down in southern Minnesota about the effects of the drought and what it's doing to cattle farmers. And while we're out in this woman's field, the idea hits because we're literally driving around in her giant Chevy pickup, and she's pointing out this field, and she's like, I put the cows there 3 days ago and they've already eaten all the grass in that field, so I had to move them to this field. And she said, you can kind of see because it's a square field. And so it was this square little area. Blow this up because it's really small. It's this square area. And yeah, I mean, it's bigger when you're driving by it. And it's one of those things that when you're in the field and we're shooting this interview at, I believe, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's airing at 9 o'clock, I can tell the reporter, hey, I've got an idea. Just write to the fact that, you know, in this field, so you get a shot of it, and we'll stop sharing things right in my way. We'll see if it plays. And in After Effects, I can just go in and animate a dotted line through it to illustrate the size of the field that the cows already plowed through, and it's gone for the rest of the summer. So, but when you're on deadline, and the reporter and this reporter I love to death, she's one of my favorite reporters to work with, but she is notorious for giving me a script 20 minutes before we hit air. And so it's one of those things that you want to try and get all your ducks in a row as much as you can, because you're going to be slamming to the very last second. And like I said, you know, when you guys are in After Effects, you don't think twice about taking a dotted line and animating it around this particular thing. I use After Effects just enough that it's like, okay, I know I can do it. I have to stop and think, what am I doing to make this work? And so we still make error, but, you know, I mean, and there's little tiny things like, you know, I could have gone in and knocked out this fence post and, you know, cloned it, and so the dotted line is behind it or whatever. Unfortunately, I don't get that time. You know, in a perfect world, I would do that. But if I mess it up, like the first time I did it and I rendered it out and looked at it, I was like, yeah, I don't really like white. I don't like black. Okay, I can settle with green. And the dynamic linking gives me just enough time to do that and still be able to export this story and get it in from the field. Because that's, you always kind of have to account for that as well. You know, I mean, if your story is airing at 9 o'clock, you can't be editing right up to 9 o'clock because you have to get it fed in and into a playback server. So, you know, I mean, efficiency and shortcuts are kind of our bread and butter. One of them that I've done that I've never really understood with Premiere is their fascination with the razor tool. By default, the razor tool, which I just kind of find highly inefficient. You know, you kind of select, okay, I want it here, maybe, and I'll slice this. I have gone into the keyboard settings and I've flip-flopped one thing and I've never understood, and someday I'll ask a Premiere engineer what the deal is with this. But there is I have to look in Control because I actually remapped it to its old thing. Maybe not. It's called Add Edit. And basically I get rid of the razor tool and I just map this Add Edit, which I believe it's either Shift Control K or Control K by default. And I just remap that to the C, which is the razor tool on your keyboard shortcuts. And instead, all it's using is just your playhead. So you don't have to try and figure out exactly where you want to be. So if I wanted to slice this right here, I can go and just hit C, and it's going to slice across everything. If I want just a video channel, I select just that, hit C, it does it. And I think some of that just comes from, in news, we're very used to the playhead being where whatever you're going to do is going to happen. And I mean, the razor tool, in theory, I can slice something down here and it does it. But I'm not looking at it, so I don't know why I'd want to slice it blindly. I've never understood that. But that, just changing that little razor tool, for me at least, and if you're used to the razor tool, hey, great, keep it. I find just having this little Add Edit, it does the exact same thing, and I can slice it and then go about with whatever I need to do. Beyond that, the Premiere layout I found is actually pretty intuitive, especially working between After Effects and Premiere. The two are laid out fairly similarly, to where, you know, I never feel like, oh my God, I can't remember any of the keyboard shortcuts between one program or the other. I think no matter what nonlinear program you use, you're gonna have the same in and out being I and O. J, K, and L are kind of your universal, I want to play something backwards or forwards, maybe at different speeds. So, you know, here's one time to, it keeps going. So from that standpoint, I think that they're fairly similar. It's drought. Okay. The other one is in the old version, or maybe this is the new version. But like one of the things we do, and there are times I just flat out run out of time. We had a story we were doing on vaccination rates in outstate Minnesota, and just didn't have time to dig into the graphics I wanted to do where she's citing specific numbers. Between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., I have the time to do it where I can go back in and just do some simple sign replacement. Blow this up again. So, you know, replace the stop sign and put a, as she's saying, a 20% difference, 70% difference in Hennepin County, that type of thing. So, you know, for the viewer, it's a little more interesting. All of these techniques, by the way, I've had to teach myself a lot of stuff, but I learned that through School of Motion, their VFX class, which is, if you like that kind of thing, cannot recommend that course highly enough. It's really mind-blowing. I believe it's Mark Christensen is his name that teaches it, and the guy knows more about visual effects than I'll ever dream of knowing. It was an absolutely fascinating class that thankfully Fox paid for. But you know, I mean, like, you see some movement in it, and in a perfect world, I would knock all of that out. But in the real world, I had 20 minutes to see if I could get these all to even line up and send a different version in between 9 and 10. So that's kind of one of those realities. Probably my last biggest tip for you in your sequence settings, and it kind of goes back to the rendering thing. If you change your video previews, and mine right now is just GoPro Cineform, but if you pick I believe the term they use is a full frame preview, and now I believe on even Windows systems you can choose ProRes as well. If you're on Mac, they recommend doing like a ProRes thing. If you do that, what it's going to do is when you go into here, you see like I've got yellow and red. So when I go through and I say, okay, I want this to render, and I usually just say render into out, it'll build the render for me. But then when I go to export this, when you're rendering it, for me, it's an MP4 that it goes into. When it's going to do that final export, if it's rendered, it will go and look at that file, the render file, and say, oh, we've already done all the calculations on this, so we can pull from it faster. So if you take the time on the front end to do this rendering, and I keep poking the screen, which you guys don't get to see as well, so sorry about that. If you do that rendering with a ProRes or the GoPro Cineform as your renderer, you already have essentially, in my world, what we'll call a broadcast ready version that's sitting there. So when I go to export this, if I've taken that time to render it out, which 99 out of 100 times I will have done that, simply because of the fact that I want the reporter to look at it and see it beforehand. So I'll take that time to render it. Your render, whether it's either within Premiere or Media Encoder, goes so much faster because it's drawing upon that full frame broadcast ready file that already exists in its memory. And I think by default, I'll cancel that. I think by default it is this iframe only, which isn't super helpful. So if you change your preview file format, and it's something you only have to do once in terms of sequence settings, I believe it'll hang on to those for you. But if you do something like GoPro Cineform, it'll save you a lot of time when you go to export it. The only other tip I'll give you on exporting, and I wish I knew why, and I don't, is very rarely, probably, I'll say 5 times a year total, although it's always at the worst times, I will get, when I go to export something, most of the time, because they're short stories, they're 2 minutes, I will simply just use the ControlM Export Media dialog. And I have a custom built export setting that plays back with our servers. About 5 times a year, I'll get it where I hit export and a dialog box pops up and says, you know, there's an error and it's gibberish I don't understand, and I've got about 8 minutes to get on air. If you get an export error, my best advice is, if you're using this export method, just go back and hit Q where it opens it up in Media Encoder. If you're using Media Encoder, just hit Direct Export. For some reason, 99% of the time when I use the opposite method, it works fine. And I don't know why. I wish I knew why one version is unhappy about something and the other version is completely fine with it. But for whatever reason, if one method fails, try the other one. And I can use the exact same preset settings and everything, and it'll work fine. And I wish I knew why.
So then,
Yeah.
Brian, do you have a preference for which you use to export?
A lot of times I end up doing just within just the export window within Premiere. And a lot of that is simply I don't have to wait for Media Encoder to load up. If I've been using Media Encoder and it's already open, sometimes I'll hit that. The only exception really is if I know I'm doing, for example, all of my raw videos. So I'll pull, let me go to the other version here. So for example, so this is the raw file here. And you can see it's basically all my clips, 4 channels of audio, and it's almost 40 minutes of video. That I will always send into Media Encoder, because interestingly, Media Encoder can be working on that, and I can still get an export dialog out of Premiere Pro to send a package in. So I'm pretty sure, I've never actually looked to see, I'm pretty sure it will pause the Media Encoder export and crank out, and that may be simply because I'm just working on a laptop that doesn't have enough horsepower. But it will pause, it'll crank out my 2-minute story and then keep working on the 40-minute version. No problem. So a lot of times I just use that export dialog because it's there and it's fast. The only thing I don't like about the export dialog is there's 2 settings. Well, there's 2 things I don't like about the export dialog. Get it to actually export. Is by default they always say sequence in out as your source range. That drives me nuts, because if I accidentally have an endpoint halfway through my story, it cuts off the first half of my story. So you really have to make sure you're doing entire sequence, and why either they don't let you select something by default and keep it, which would be fantastic, or select this by default, because sequence in out has burned me once or twice. The only other thing I don't like about the export dialog is you don't really see what's happening. If you use Media Encoder a lot, you know, a little video window pops up and you see it going really fast as it goes along. If I hit export here, let's see, yeah, you get the progress bar, but you don't see the video as it's going along. So, you know, I mean, if you like seeing that, and again, yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with a 2-minute news story, it goes through and you can tell exactly where it's hit the graphics because it slows way down. And I don't think I finished rendering them all. But then as soon as it'll get through that section, it starts picking up again. And this is just well, it's an HP workstation laptop. So it is a higher end laptop, but you know, this isn't a giant machine that I'm working here. But if you need to see that little kind of preview thing as it's going along, you want to stay in Media Encoder, because it just doesn't pop up in this version. But otherwise, either one, you don't really get a time savings either way. They seem to work about the same speed. So, which, I mean, like I said, for us, speed is everything. We try to make it pretty, but speed comes first, unfortunately. So I'd love to teach you more about like the Lumetri, which it's very rare that I get into color correction again, I like it because they have the tabs kind of set up here. The biggest thing you can do in that I like in Premiere is if I mess up my white balance, I can just use this little eyedropper tool over here on the right under basic correction, find some white and say that's what, and you can see it changed it just a little bit. The reds kind of went up a little bit and say that's what white looks like. That's the quickest, easiest way to change your colors, especially, you know, if you're blatantly wrong. And ask any news photographer, and at some point in our career, we have been blatantly wrong and interviewed what looks like Papa Smurf. And when I did it one time, we didn't have nonlinear editors, and so it was a lot bigger disaster because you didn't have an eyedropper just to drop on and say, fix it for me. So the other, and Paul and I were talking about it just real briefly, the newest thing with Premiere is this captions tab. And I don't think I have it here, but you can literally now have Premiere transcribe interviews for you. So if you have, the idea being that you're putting it into not a closed, an open caption system. So it's creating all of that for you automatically. So if you don't want to type out captions and stuff in Adobe After Effects, now you can have Premiere transcribe it for you, and you can export it as a text file, cut and paste into After Effects, which I haven't tried that yet. I haven't had a need for that yet. But for our interviews, the transcribe is becoming an interesting tool to work with. So I don't know. Does anyone have any questions? I've probably gone either way short or way long. I'm never really right on time.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
How many stories do you have to work on in a day? Do you just have to do one, or are you doing multiples where you're going crazy?
We typically will be assigned one story per day. We'll do multiple versions of that story. Typically, I'll go in at 2 o'clock. We'll get our assignment, and in a, I'll say a normal day, we'll be expected to turn that story for the 9 p.m. newscast. There are days I go in and, well, I don't even go in anymore with COVID. I haven't been in our newsroom for 17 months now, 17, 18 months. So now they just kind of either text, email, Slack, whatever to get us and say, okay, you're working with this reporter, this is your story. There are days where our story will hit at 5 p.m. and we're starting at 2. So the other weird quirk with news is we can be completely done with something, finishing up editing on it, and they say we need to move you to this breaking news instead. And all of that just sits to the side, and your day starts over at 8 p.m. But typically we're doing one story, but it is multiple versions. You'll kind of see in a lot of these bins, you'll see a 9p, 10p, and that's just our short code for the 9 o'clock package. Package meaning it has everything self-contained. The reporter track, the interviews, the video are all in that one package. And we'll do different versions for 9 and 10. So the really ugly days are when you have a 5 package, a 6, a 9, a 10. You don't like those days. So a lot of it is very quick turn. It's like I said, speed is our friend and beauty is a distant second. So I'm always jealous when I see these really nicely crafted things here. I'm like, yeah.
So it's really all done and edit as fast as possible.
Yeah, and a lot of it is good communication with the reporter and trying to hammer out what elements we're going to use, what elements we aren't. Especially now, you know, if I need to pull file video from the station, we use a system called Bit Central that I can log into remotely and dig into our archives, download stuff directly into my laptop. You know, I mean, if we're doing something with the State House or something and I need file video of legislators. I can go into the system and look at that. But I mean, all of those things take time to where, the communication's kind of paramount to try and make the editing as nice as you can make it in the time you're given. I can't see anything.
Are there other questions for Brian?
So quiet.
Brian, what's your favorite feature or tool in Premiere?
My favorite, probably the eyedropper to do the color correction is fantastic. Probably, in all honesty, probably just the dynamic link. I mean, that for me was the biggest reason why I kind of learned Premiere on my own, because technically we edit on this program called Edius that Grass Valley makes, that is a very, very stripped down editing system. And one of these folders I have, well, which story was it? The graphics, yeah, here it is. Our fine corporate graphics are just hideous. And so with it kind of started as, oh, well, I can do something in After Effects with court documents or these signs or whatever, and I still have a shot at getting on air on time simply because of dynamic link and the power that it has between it. So that was really the big catalyst for me in learning Premiere. And I mean, I had managers who were like, yeah, well, if you're using After Effects, we'll get you an Adobe license to do this stuff. We have a couple of our investigative guys who use After Effects a little more extensively that still will finish editing in Edius, and they just haven't learned Premiere. And I'm like, you guys can save so much time. And part of it is just the workflow. They haven't had the time to learn it. But the other thing I really like is along here, this top bar, just being able to, when I've got to go through and say, okay, I need to tweak the audio, just to be able to hit audio and all of the correct tools that I need come up. And you have the audio track mixer, but then, you can pick the individual audio clip. The way that they've kind of thought out these different tabs, in the graphics tab, I have, I've built a couple of Mogerts for, I'm gonna find it through all of these courtesy ones, where if we give something, a still photo that someone sends us of storm damage or something, we have to courtesy what the source of that is. So I can, I've taken that motion graphic template in, and it matches our look. I just built it myself where it matches our look exactly, but I can go into it, put who I need, and then adjust the little box length so that it kind of matches there. And instead of just being a blah still thing, when it comes up, it animates on. And it's just those little, a guy I work with calls it the 1% rule, where these little things that are 1% of distractions either keep or lose your viewers. And so, if you can just make it that much more interesting to engage someone, they won't necessarily know what it is, but they'll still like it.
Thank you, Brian. We have a question from chat. Peter asks, do you use the essential graphics in your workflow? And if so, what has your experience been with it?
Essential graphics, I've built this out. I've contemplated building our lower third supers, but I haven't tackled that one yet because they keep changing them on us. And that's part of the reason why I don't, is they keep changing it, and I don't have time to go and rebuild them. I do like them. I've actually used them quite a bit. If we go back in here, some of them you may have seen. It was a project for my son's middle school where they were doing like a career day virtually because of COVID and everything. So they were doing like video interviews of different careers and stuff. And so we built out like these little thought bubbles and transition bubbles and stuff for the videos. So I really started using them extensively with that project. And I love the essential graphics stuff. News, we don't really have a lot of excuses to build out the templates and use them. That project was the first time where I really had a good excuse to use them, and they're fantastic. It seems to me like every time they do it, they add more and more features and more things that you can do from After Effects and make it into an essential graphics template to where, you know, if I just throw this one down here, you know, I mean, you know, it's like, okay, this is a thought bubble. You know, you can change the text and you change the text and the size of the text and move the bubble and the bubble size. And, you know, there's so many different things that we discovered with that I became a big fan of them. I think they're great. And, you know, if you're really good at designing those, you can make some good money too on a lot of these things, that these different sites that kind of sell the template, you know, and I don't have any of those skills whatsoever. But I think that Adobe's invested a lot into it, and it's getting better and better between the two. I'm a huge fan of them. I love them.
Great. Are there any other questions for Brian?
I'm gonna stop sharing this so I can see something.
You can see our faces again.
Yeah.
Brian, there's
See an empty room.
I can't remember if it was the last meetup we had or the meetup before that we covered Mogarts and essential graphics extensively, and it was one of those things too where people who are watching are just like, oh, I can do that. Like that's amazing.
Yeah, the amazing thing to me is it kind of started with like, yeah, you can do some text and some basic this and that, but we you can't change this feature yet. You can't change. Now it's like, you know, I think it was in that thing where it was like, oh yeah, if you hold down this key combination, it shows you everything that's available to change, and it's like you have to sit there and scroll through everything to see everything that's available. I mean, it's just amazing to me.
Yeah.
And that's where like smart people that really know After Effects, like you guys, you know, I would lean on you guys heavily, just like, okay, I wanted to do this, but I don't have time to create it. So
there is a handy expression you can use to automatically adjust that text box in the background so you wouldn't get a slider.
Yeah, and see, I knew everyone was gonna know that too. And I think that came out after I had done that, and I'm like, yeah, I could go back and redo this, but I never get time.
That's always the problem, right? Like you got to find that time to.
Well, yeah, my biggest problem is when I have the time, my work laptop is nowhere near me, and I don't want it anymore. And it just lives locally on the work laptop. So I'm like, yeah, if I actually I had to remember to bring the work laptop with me this week. So that was the biggest challenge.
Well, I think it looks like people are there. There were a lot of smiles and nods, and like if you lean in to the camera while you were giving your presentation. So really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm glad you remembered your work laptop up in your trip.
Yeah.
And that you were able to.
And I mean, if you have any questions, feel free to grab me on, you know, either the Facebook page or I don't know if it has my name on here, because all it says to me is you. So, but it's just my email is just my first name dot last name at fox.com. So you always can shoot me an email that way too. And, you know, if you're stuck on something in Premiere, I'm more than happy to help. Because Lord knows I get stuck in After Effects quite a bit.
Well, you can always use the Facebook Discord to ask us questions too in After Effects.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to to school us on some Premiere Pro tips.
Yeah. I don't know how many of them were tips. You know, like I said, we are more speed over beauty. So, you know, I mean, if it speeds up your workflow, then hopefully you have time to make it look a little prettier. Unfortunately, 9 p.m. always hits.
Yeah.
I realized I've always exported with that iframe option, and now I know why my exports were always a struggle in Premiere. So I'm happy. Like, I've definitely learned something super useful today.
And I forget where I heard that tip, but I was like, okay, that totally makes sense. And as soon as I did it, you'll notice the first couple times you'll be like, okay, it seems like the render is slowed down just a little bit. It's not super perceptible, but the savings that you get on the back end when you go to export it are amazing. I mean, a 2-minute story now, if it's anything over about 40 seconds in export time, I'm like, why is this going so slow? And I mean, as a comparison, the people in our shop that use Edius were complaining about the fact that it's basically a real-time export. So a 2-minute story takes that program 2 minutes to export it out. So, you know, I mean, Adobe is saving you time in the right places for sure. I mean, at least in news.
Remember when export and ingest?
Oh, well, in ingest, the funny thing with ingest is I don't even try with my camera because there's some quirk that Adobe has with the P2 system that it renames all my clips to like random file names. And so I just copy the card across onto my laptop and then go from there. But if I use the ingest feature, it completely mucks everything up. And you can't tell what clip was what anymore. So, and I literally have asked like Premiere engineers and they're like, yeah, it's doing that and we don't know why. And we'll get back to you. And that was 5 years ago. So
that's very reassuring.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I was really happy when 2021 the audio completely disappeared, and it took them 3 months to fix it. I was like, it worked before you broke it. How can you go back and fix it? Well, we're working on it. So, which is, and I mean, I don't use After Effects enough to know if it has all those glitches when you get those major version jumps. But people who live in Premiere Pro, like the #1 rule is do not jump in head first into the new version. I won't even download it for the first couple of weeks. I'll just look at the support forums in Adobe and see what everyone's complaining about first and get a sense. And usually by about 0.1, 0.2, they've fixed it. This one took to, I think they're up to either 0.4 or 0.5. Before they finally fixed the problem with my camera. So, but they did, so.
Great. I think it's somewhat similar with After Effects in that, you know, you never want to jump on right away, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, Premiere just taught me, so like any of them, but like there was something new in After Effects. I'm like, yeah, I'd really like to use that, but Premiere hasn't caught up yet because I can't get my camera to see audio, so I'm not going to do it in the newest version of After Effects yet. So, I mean, that to me is the only flaw is, you know, you have to be on the same version of everything. The 2020, if you're using Premiere 2020, you need to be in After Effects 2020 for the dynamic link to work correctly. You know, you can't mix your years, so to speak. So, you know, if you've jumped ahead in After Effects, you'll have to jump ahead in Premiere as well. Is what I've heard. I've never tried to mix them, and unfortunately I never get the time to experiment like that.
Yeah, I think it's true to a certain extent. I think, you know, if you're rendering out of After Effects, it doesn't matter, but yeah, dynamic link.
Yeah,
your project.
Everything I've read, the dynamic link is one of the key elements. Is it has to be the same years CC that they're doing. So.
Great. Well, again, thank you, and really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
And next, we're going to jump into some of the prompts for the camping prompt that we had over the summer, and we have two of them to take a look at. Jill and Hannah. We're both here tonight. Yay! Hi, you two. So we will take a look at. I believe this is Jill's first, because you were the first one to post it, so you get to. You get to be the first one to go tonight. So I'm gonna turn down my volume, so hopefully we won't get an echo again, because there is some sound in here. And we'll take a look at Jill's. So that is a mean bunny. I just have to say. So is there anything you want to share with us about your process or your thoughts or the story behind this one?
Well, like all of my submissions I ever do, it's just autobiographical. I don't have that much creativity to come up with a completely fictional scene. So
okay, hold up.
When rabbit.
When did you see that rabbit?
Hmm?
When did you see this rabbit?
I saw that rabbit in Colorado, and I was like the first person on the trail after winter, and it was starving, and it wanted my food.
Oh no.
That's it.
Well, I hope. Well, you clearly were able to walk away from that encounter at least. So. Oh, wildlife. And was that is that all vector that you did yourself, or is that Flash, or what did you use to put the?
I drew out the shapes in Illustrator and then brought them in to break them apart again in After Effects.
Was it fun? It was one of those ones when I watched you through the first time. I was like, oh, that's cute. And then it made the turn. I was like, oh, at first, honestly, when I saw the apple go, I was like, was that blood?
I suppose, yeah.
What just happened? But then it ran away.
I like the little nose twitch of the bunny.
Thanks.
Yeah, I watched that and I realized I could probably do that if you gave me like a year to do that.
So great, thanks for putting that together for camping. I'm sorry that you had to experience that while camping, but now we're going to take a look at Hannah's. Let me pop open the Vimeo page, and I'll take a look. And it looks like this also has a breakdown in it. Is that right, Hannah?
Yep, I made a little breakdown of it because the video was too short, so I need to pad it out. Here's some more shots of the same thing you already saw.
So we'll take a look here on Vimeo. So
that was
this
a fun little piece, yeah.
What was that one?
I was gonna say that the little Lego man blinks his eyes at the end. That's why I titled it "Blink and You Miss It" because this is so subtle. But I wanted to make his eyeballs blink.
Hold on, I have to watch this. Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Hannah, how did you do the fire effect? Because I made artwork for my own camping prompt, and then I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do the fire. I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah, so my inspiration for this was I didn't want to do anything on the computer because I was sick of working on the computer all the time. And I ran into a similar issue of where, okay, I'm not going to spend the time to do stop motion because ain't nobody got time for that. But I still wanted to add a little bit of motion, and a fire I thought was a great way to do it. And I originally tried to animate the fire using fractal noise displacement effect, and it didn't work very well. I ended up using that a little bit for heat distortion above the fire. But what I ended up doing was finding just film footage of a fire and then cranking up the levels, really crushing the blacks and the whites, and then using that as a displacement mat for the campfire, which I'd never done with video footage before, but I thought it worked out pretty well and was just subtle enough. You could still tell it was tissue paper, but it was still a fire. So
Yeah, it's great.
I wish I would have made the effect a little bit larger, but I think it worked.
I think it worked. When you first look at it, I mean, it's subtle, but it's noticeable too. Like it's very clearly something added on top of this
Yeah.
Lego set. And I think now that you mentioned that you actually use like flames in your displacement, you can actually see it like radiating and waving up in the way that a normal fractal noise wouldn't really show you.
Yeah, fractal noise was just a little too uniform, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's working. You got a decent amount of Legos to work with too, it looks like.
Yeah, that was definitely taking up a lot of space on my floor. Just one day, my roommate walks in and is like, "Oh, where did this come from?" It's like, "Don't worry, I need to borrow your flashlight." Like, shining lights all over it. Yep.
It was awesome. Well, thank you, Jill and Hannah, for sharing those. That is awesome to see. So we're running a little long tonight, but that's okay because we've been talking about a lot of fun things. Does anyone have any show and tell, either something they'd like to everyone to see, some feedback on, question they've been having, or any other quandary they might want to pose to the people here in real time?
I do have a question. You mentioned how the 3D gizmos were getting updated in After Effects.
Yeah.
I have noticed that when I try and move or translate an object by grabbing the gizmo, like just on the x-axis or just on the y, that it will actually move my shape in all three axes, even though I'm specifically only grabbing the x-axis, and it looks like it's only moving along the x. Has anyone else had that problem, and do you know if and when that will be fixed?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know when things will be fixed.
Yeah, if it's like, I don't know if I'm the only one having this issue.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't done enough 3D in the beta to really play with the gizmos a lot. I like the idea of them, I think, a little bit more than the current implementation. And I would say that's, have you ever used user voice for the After Effects forum? So that's their feedback forum, and it's actually used in much more public, much more than the old like bug report forum where you'd submit it and they wouldn't see anything. People did see it, but you'd never have any idea of like what's going on. The user voice, which I don't have the link for off the top of my head right now, what that will do is it actually essentially makes a public post that Adobe is very keyed into, because that's their method of feedback now. And so if other people are noticing this, like they can vote on it, it gains traction and visibility, and people can comment to like, I've had this exact same problem. And it's more productive than just complaining online, because it's actually what Adobe uses for feedback and they'll see it. So I would try going there, and I'll dig up the link and post it in the Discord and Facebook.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that existed.
It's really handy. And sometimes what they've been doing too is some of these newer beta features, like they'll actually make a post or reply to that issue or feature request that somebody might have made in user voice, and like go in detail about some of those new things that they're doing. So it's a worthwhile thing to check out. There are, of course, some things that have like hundreds of votes that have been there for years that still haven't been touched, but that's the world of prioritizing features and software development. It's not a fun thing to do, especially in a place as large as Adobe is, I'm sure. I'm trying to think if I ever ran into a problem like that. I don't know that I have. I'm even like popping open After Effects now and like putting it in. But you said it was mostly that like you're trying to use one axis and it's turning all of them.
Yeah, I can tell because as I'm moving it along the X and I have the position properties open, just all the numbers are moving. But visually, because you're looking at it in 2 dimensions, it looks like you're only moving it along the X. But all X, Y, and Z position values are moving. And that has thrown me off several times.
Is it do you have a camera in the scene?
Probably. I know sometimes I do and sometimes I don't.
Yeah, because my only other thought is that if your view is off axis, like if you're coming at like from, you know, like off to the like 45-degree angle, and your shape is square to the camera, then those axes are moving
In world position instead of
world
local.
position. Yeah, so like
or vice versa.
Yeah, or however. I'm glad you're. I think you're getting what I'm saying. But that's
yeah, I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah.
I work with that all the time in Blender, but I hadn't. It's still weird for me trying to do 3D stuff in After Effects.
Yeah. It's because I think because if it's rotated too and you move them, it's going to move along the object axes. And I think there's a way to. Actually, I'm going to share my screen because this might be helpful to see, and it's small, which I apologize.
If there's a way to change it from global to local, that's probably what I want to do.
Yeah. So here, you can see it's rotated a little bit, and if I'm moving the X, and if you're watching down here, you can see the X is moving. There's actually these switches up here, and the second one will change it to the view axes. And now if I move it.
Oh my goodness, was it that simple the whole time?
Maybe it's that one. I don't know what this third one is. I have no idea what this third button is, but that would be my guess, is to toggle between these two and see if one of those will help figure it out or make it work out for you.
Huh. I didn't know those buttons were there.
I thought I like vaguely remembered something about that, but I had to open it up to see. So I'm sure you're not alone.
We should do a small button day where we just go through all these teeny tiny things that no one thinks to look at.
There's somebody, I think he's affiliated with School of Motion, Jake Bartlett, who is going through on his YouTube channel and covering like all of the effects in After Effects. And I think it's like 100 days, and he's like publishing a video a day or something, and he's grouping some together. And I know he has a bunch finished. It's not like he's producing one every day, but still, that's a lot of work. And that's a link that's going to go out in the newsletter, and that's something to check out too. And I feel like we could do the same thing with every single button in After Effects. And problem is they keep changing. Do we have any other questions or things to show? Take the stunned silence as a no, we're all good. Jill, I see, said it was news to you as well. So, hey, I'm glad that helped and that I remembered that tiny little button while we were on the meeting. So there's only a little bit to cover, and that's going to be what we're going to do in the near future. And so coming up, our next meetup is going to be digital still. It'll be September 16th for now. As of now, the plan is for Tara to show some green screen process and keying in After Effects. That may or may not change depending on us hearing back from some other people and life, because we all have jobs and things. So we'll see how that goes, and there'll be an announcement towards the end of the month or the beginning of September, so you'll know what's coming up. Also, I mentioned the newsletter that's going to go out at the end of every month. Mostly, I did miss a month, same month that we missed the meetup, so that's my justification for it. We didn't have a meetup, so we didn't have a newsletter. So be sure to sign up for that if you're not already. There is a tab on our webpage for you to go take care of that. And also, if you have quick tips, I know getting in front of people and talking isn't always something that's in everybody's wheelhouse or something that people think of wanting to do. But we're a small, friendly group, as you can see. And if you have any small tips that you think you'd be willing to share, let us know either on Facebook, Discord, emails, carrier pigeons, rocks through my window. Maybe not rocks, now that I think about it. But let us know, and we can get you on one of our meetups. It's just a couple minutes and showing something cool that you think that that is helpful to you. And I
Could
guarantee
even be less than a minute.
could be. It could be 30 seconds. And I guarantee you that somebody will find it useful. Just like Hannah, you asked this question, we found that button, and now Jill learned something new too. So it's for sure beneficial to share stuff that you know, and encourage you to do so if you can. But that's it for our meetup tonight. And I really appreciate Brian for coming out and showing your Premiere Pro prowess, and Hannah and Jill for your prompts, and for everyone coming out and sharing and asking questions. It's always a fun evening, and we will see you in a month-ish. So
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.